Welcome to Meet with an Expert Retirement. Yes, you should care right now. My name is Shalise Connors, and I am the Executive Director of the Student Money Management Center. I want to begin by welcoming all of you to this information center and to Maroon Money Month 2026. Yeah, we're right in the middle of it. We are in actually week 2 of 5 weeks of events
Oh,
and
that's a
workshops.
lot of weeks.
It is a lot of weeks. That's a lot of time to have engagement with our students, fun financial games, and it's all in celebration of National Financial Literacy Month. The SMMC serves students on all 3 campuses. We bring you programs such as this one tonight and so much more throughout the school year. We really encourage you to stay in touch with us by following us on social media, as well as, like I said, viewing our programming on our YouTube channel. Our handle across Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube is at TW Maroon Money. Online with us this evening is Cameron Penny. She is our Student Financial Resolution Coordinator in the SMMC, as well as Shane Meeks, one of our Maroon Money mentors, who helped to bring you tonight's Meet with an Expert. And our expert presenter this evening is, backed by popular demand, Dr. Megan Burke, and I will introduce her here in a moment. We just want to have a few housekeeping items to pass along to you. Like I said, this recording will be on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation. Dr. Burke loves to answer questions as we go along, but if we have anything
Happy
at the
to.
very end, Cameron will help make sure that we get your questions asked. If you'd like, be sure to view this presentation with your camera off. You can turn it on to ask questions as well if you'd like to do that in person. When you do sign off from our info session tonight, there will be a 6-question survey that'll pop up. It's really quick, very short, it's anonymous. If you could fill that out for us, it really helps us with our programming. Lets us know if you like what we're doing and what we can help you with in the future. Okay? So let's meet our presenter. Dr. Megan Burke is an associate professor of accounting here at TWU. She earned her accounting degrees from Virginia Tech and the College of William and Mary, including her PhD, and she is also a licensed CPA. Before joining Texas Women's in 2020, she taught at several universities, including Texas A&M University Commerce and Old Dominion University. Dr. Burke loves accounting. She has loved it since middle school, and she brings that enthusiasm into her teaching every day. We are very glad to have her here again, sharing her expertise with us. So, Dr. Burke, I will turn the program over to you.
Perfect. So thanks for coming. As she said, we're going to talk about retirement this time. Last time it was taxes. So today is retirement. And this should really be like the importance of saving for retirement, right? Subtitle, why starting early matters, right? Like whatever you choose to call this. So we're talking about retirement, which probably seems pretty far off, right? You're like, I haven't even graduated yet. Why are we talking about retirement? But the earlier you start thinking about this, the more power you're going to have to shape your future, right? And allow you to actually retire, which is something we all want to do, right? So as she said, I'm Dr. Burke. I am a licensed CPA, but I'm not your CPA, right? So this is just general advice here. I will tell you though, as an accounting professor, like this topic, retirement, is like near and dear to my heart. I love it. And I hope that by the end of the presentation, it's close to your heart as well, right? So again, right now, retirement probably feels like it is a lifetime away, but that's exactly why this matters now, right? So thanks to compound interest, time is really your biggest asset here, right? A few dollars saved in your 20s can be worth so much more than large amounts even saved later in life, right? So we're just going to get started early and just make this like part of our paycheck, our, financial routine every month so that it sort of happens automatically and we don't, get out of school, have our first paycheck and just blow it all. We just get used to going from like we're a poor college student to we're still kind of a, poor new employee and we don't adjust and we just make savings happen there. And we're going to see why that matters and why it's worth maybe foregoing, a concert or whatever you were otherwise going to spend the money on. So we're going to talk a little bit about the power of compounding, right? So like let's assume that we're 25 And we have a 10,000, we have a very gracious, generous family member who's going to give us $10,000 when we graduate, right? And we're going to try to figure out what the heck we want to do with this. And we have talked to our friends in the College of Business, or, we went through the College of Business, and we're going to apply some of our skills that we're learning. We're going to go on the internet and try to learn some skills, whatever. And we're going to get a 12% return. And we have, a pretty high tax rate here, 35%. We can, change all of this. But I wanted to set the tax rate pretty high, right? We want to give the government a good chunk of this return just to sort of see where it is, right? So we're going to be 25. We're going to take this deposit, this $10,000, and we're going to put it in an account, right? And we're going to let it sit there for 30 years until we're 55, right? So we're not going to touch it. That's going to give us this opportunity to take advantage of the power of compounding, right? So what exactly does that mean? That means this year we have $10,000 in our account, and it's going to earn a return, right? And again, we're going to earn 12%, but the government wants a piece of that, right? So 35% of it's going to go to them. And so we really have an extra $780, right? That's after tax. So next year, what's happening? We have the original $10,000, and then we have an extra $780, right? Again, sort of after tax. And so we're going to earn a return on $10,780, right? And that's going to earn a return. And we earn a return on the bigger amount. And then we earn a return on an even bigger amount, right? And so that's what we're talking about with compounding. Our interest is able to then earn interest as well, or, the return can earn a return as well. So we're going to be a smart planner, right? We're going to do this at 12%. We're a super smart investor here, 10,000. Where do we think this ends up? A single deposit of $10,000, just earning 12%, no special tax savings or anything at the end of 30 years when we're 55. That $10,000 becomes almost $100,000, right? It's 95,000 and some change. But that was a one-time investment of $10,000, right? And why do I show you this? Because it really is about time. And that's what you have on your side right now, right? When we're just getting out of school, we still have a lot of years left to be working, right? And so time right now is probably one of our most valuable assets, right? So again, we were a smart investor here. We were generating a return of 12%. The average stock market return, like long term, is about 10%, right? So let's think about a couple of things we can change here. Well, what if we say time really matters? What if we want to work until we're 65, right? And that gives that deposit, that single deposit of 10,000, it's going to give it another 10 years to grow, right? Where do we think we go from $100,000, just under $100,000, with another 10 years of compounding, right? Like this is a pretty steep curve we're dealing with here, right? So going from 55 to 65, what happens? Boom, we're at about $200,000. Another 10 years here more than doubled our balance, right? We were again at about $95,000 in year 30, and we were able to go to just over $200,000 in year 40, right? And so that's, waiting until we're 65. What if you're like, you know what? I'm amazing. I'm going to be in amazing health. I picked a career I love. I can do it for a while. I'm going to hang out until I'm freaking 75, right? Like that's 50 years, which is a long time from now, right? But again, this is saying we take that graduation money and we put it in this account. Where do we think this goes from 40 to 50? Right? We more than doubled. So now that single deposit of $10,000 got us to $425,000, right? So again, being able to make that deposit when we were young and giving it a long runway, right? And as we compound, we're seeing that it just stacks up so much faster, right? So we put in 10,000 when we were 25, and here we went 50 whole freaking years, right? Which is a really long time out to 75. But that got us $10,000 grew to $425,000, right? Now, if we had waited until we were, say, 55 to start saving for retirement, that $10,000 would have had what, like 10 years to compound between 55 and 65? And we'd have right? We're like way down here at that point, right? We would have only had the 10 years. So we're at like $21,000, right? That's not enough to retire on, right? So a dollar invested today is going to be so much more valuable than investing those big chunks of money closer to retirement, right? Again, time is really your best asset, right? And so what else do we care about here, right? We were talking about like being a smart investor, and that's great, but time in the market is way more important than timing the market, right? And trying to, buy low and sell high, right? Buy the dip, right? Um, that time in the market, the ability for that compound to compound is more important than being the smartest investor out there, right? So again, I want to go back and reiterate, this was a single $10,000 deposit, right? One time. And so here I'm just trying to illustrate the impact of time and why it is just so, so important for us. The next thing would be the power of consistency, right? So here we started out, we did a one-time deposit, and now we're saying instead of a single $10,000 deposit, let's say we can come up with $10,000 every year. And I know that that's a stretch, but we were using $10,000, right? So I just kind of want to stick with our theme, right? So you can sort of magnitude see that change, right? So again, we're talking about consistency. What happens if we can do this every single year, right? So there we go. Like, didn't want to change slides. It was getting stuck. So here, we went from $10,000 one time to now we're going to do $10,000 each year. We're going to earn a 12% return, right? Because we're going to still be a savvy investor. We're still going to pay tax at 35%, right? Because I want to show this as like conservative as possible on that, right? The IRS, the Treasury, the government taking a big chunk of your return, right? We would have $1 million, right? Pretty quickly, right? Like right in here, we're already at about $1 million between, 28 and 29 years, right? Where are we at 40 years, right? If we did this again, starting at 25 and we went out 40 years, what happens? So again, start at 25, leave it in there for 40 years, you're 65, right? Retirement age, you would have over $2.65 million, right? And if you could wait those extra years, right, and you retired at 75, where would you be? At just under $6 million. Now, how much would you have put in over your lifetime or, this timeline if you did $10,000 a year for 50 years? That's $500,000. Now, that's not small change, right? That's $500,000, $500,000. But you put 500,000 in and you're at almost $6 million, right? So now what have we shown you? My two favorite things, starting early and being consistent, right? They're just super important tools. And that can obviously change what your retirement looks like by a lot, right? So the power of compounding by starting early and consistency by doing what you've probably heard it before, right? Paying ourselves first and saving every year, again, had this huge impact and makes it so it's sort of feasible for us to retire. Well, that's not all we can do, right? I just wanted to start, plain Jane, we're going to put this in a savings account. We're going to let this grow. So we're starting early. We're being consistent. What else can we do? Well, let's ask the government to help, right? So in the previous examples, right, we earned a return of 12%. We did that by being a smart investor, but we were paying tax on that return each year. So we deposited $10,000. We earned a return of $1,200. But then we needed to pay the government, right? And that was 35%. So they were taking some of it, or $420. And so that left us with $780. So then you had $10,780, right? And we let that grow. So what if there was a way, though, to avoid paying that tax? Well, that's what we're asking when we say, let's ask the government to help us out, right? So we'll start with an example where we don't get to avoid paying the tax altogether, but we can do what's called deferring the tax. That means putting it off. So we're going to pay the tax all the way at the end. So instead of having to pay the tax each year, right, and giving a little bit to the government each year as we go, we're going to let this account grow. And then at the very end, we're going to pay the tax, right? And so we'll pay the tax as we take the money out of the account. Why does that matter? Well, in this case, we actually get to keep 1,200 of that return in the account compounding rather than just 780, right? So 1,200 stays in the account instead of 780, and we're going to let that grow till the very end. And you're like, well, we still have to pay the tax. But remember, compounding matters a lot. So leaving that extra $420 in the account to generate a return, to generate a return, to generate a return is really going to help us out, right? So how do we do this? We're going to do this through some sort of tax deferred retirement account. So the government says, we want to encourage you to save money for retirement. We think if you do that, you're less likely to need the government to help support you in retirement. So we want to provide some ways to encourage you to do that. And we use the tax law to do that. And that is that we created these tax deferred retirement accounts. So again, you put the money in, it gets to grow. We don't pay the tax until the end, right? Tax and then deferred, meaning the tax is getting paid sometime down the road. So let's look at some options. We may have employer-sponsored plans. So this is where obviously your employer puts the plan together, a 401k, a 403b. There are a couple of different numbers, names, whatever. You've hopefully at least heard of 401ks before, right? So our employers are going to sponsor these plans, and they will actually take money out of your paycheck and put it in there before you even see it, right? Now, the nice part about that is that it's creating a tax deduction essentially, right? Because it's reducing your taxable income. So we haven't even paid tax on that, right? So it creates actually some tax savings for us in addition to putting off paying the taxes until way at the end, right? We actually get some extra benefits there. We have IRAs, those are individual retirement accounts, right? And so we set those up on our own, right? So instead of our employer having the plan all set up and established, we do this on our own. We go to the bank and we open up an account. I want to open up an individual retirement account, and we start putting money in there, and it gets these special tax treatments. Two flavors here, a traditional and a Roth, and actually 401ks can come in a traditional or a Roth as well. It's slightly more technical, but they are options in the 401k. So what happens in the traditional? We generally get a deduction up front. The IRA, sometimes you don't, but it is possible to take that deduction up front. Same thing with like the 401k. We don't include that in taxable income. So you get the deduction up front, but then as you take distributions in retirement, you need to pay tax on that. Roth says, well, you don't really get a deduction now when you put the money in there, but in the future, when you take that out, it's not going to be taxable, right? So when you see those terms, that's really what we're talking about. When or if do you pay any tax? So traditional, we're going to pay tax at the end. Roth, those distributions are always going to be tax-free. And then we have Social Security. It's really a supplement. We can't like really pay into that, but it's just a thing to sort of keep in mind when you think about retirement planning. And obviously there's some question about whether or not that's going to be solvent in paying when you retire, but it is good to just like put it out there, right? So these accounts offer different sorts of tax benefits, right? And some of them may even have some free money through your employer, right? Through employee matching or employer matching. The earlier we start using these things, the better, right? So let's talk a little bit about these, right? We have those employer plans, right? So again, if your job or future job offers you these plans, you typically want to take advantage of them, especially if they offer a match. And what does that mean? Like if I put in 3% of my salary, so I say you can, hold out 3% of my salary and put it in this account, your employer is also going to put in 3%. So if you make $50,000 a year, right, that's $1,500 that you're going to put in. So they're going to take that out of your check before you even see it. So $1,500 came out of your check and went in. And then your employer says, here's another $1,500, and they put that money in, right? So it's instantly doubling your return, right? So an instant double. So to the extent that you can, you want to take advantage of that employer match, right? Again, it's free money. It's part of your benefits package. To the extent that you can, you want to take advantage of that. Again, some of these accounts are tax deductible, right? They reduce your taxable income. So you can actually deposit a little bit more money in your account by also depositing the tax savings in, right? So there's maybe some additional money that you can put in there because you're reducing your tax bill. So you can take those tax savings and also put them in. And now, if your tax savings also, are still below your employer match, then even better, right? You're going to get the match as well on the extra contributions. So what if we don't have an employer plan, right? We're working part-time, maybe we aren't benefits eligible, we're doing a lot of gig work, whatever. Again, you can do these IRAs, individual retirement accounts. Part of the downside here, they have much lower contribution limits, so you can't put quite as much money into an IRA as you can something like a 401k, 403b. But they're a good option if you got nothing else. And you can still do an IRA even if you have an employer plan, right? So it's a good option to supplement. And if, let's say, you manage to max out the contribution to your 401k and you're like, I still have cash that I could put away for retirement, the IRA is a great place for that. Now, again, when you choose between that traditional or the Roth account, right, it's about when you want to pay the taxes, right? Do you want to pay the tax now or do you want to pay the tax later, right? Again, with traditional, your deposit's being made with pre-tax dollars, but again, the distribution is going to be taxable in retirement, right? So the contribution and the earnings. With a Roth, right, again, you don't get the deduction for the contribution now, but those earnings get to grow tax-free and you don't have to pay any tax in retirement. So when do you want to do that? A Roth IRA, if you expect to have a higher tax rate in retirement, that is the way to go. So if you're like, hey, I'm just starting out right now, I have a really low tax rate, but I'm going to, kill it at work, for the next 40 years, whatever it is. And then I'm going to have, or 50 years, and I have almost $6 million because I've been putting my $10,000 away. I think my tax rate's going to be a lot higher. The Roth is amazing, right? You don't get the deduction now, but you had a low tax rate right now. And then in the future, when your tax rate's much higher, right? All of those distributions are coming out completely tax-free in retirement, right? So if you expect your tax rate to be higher in retirement, you want to go the Roth route. All right, let's look at a 401k. And this is because I want to show you why you care about your employer match and why you want to try to find a way to make this happen. Again, I know it's super hard when you're starting out and you're like, I am like counting nickels, right? Trying to make sure I can have groceries this month. Like, I get how hard it is, right? But I just want to provide us with an example of sort of why this matters and why we want to do this, right? So we're going to use the 401k and we'll start out with no employer match, right? So our employer's not going to match this. We're just going to take that same $10,000 we were investing earlier. And again, why do I do that? Because I want to keep the same number through all of them so you can sort of see the magnitude. $10,000 is easy to work with, right? Because it's a one with a lot of zeros, right? And I get that it's a pretty substantial amount and it's hard to come up with $10,000 in a year to put away. But again, it allows us to compare and the math is really easy, right? Because it's one and a lot of zeros. So we're going to take that same $10,000 we were investing earlier, but now it's tax deductible, right? So we can actually invest more money and have the same after-tax cost, right? So we can do some math here, and we would see that we would have some savings. So some amount minus the tax savings needs to equal 10,000, right? And we work our way backwards. So putting $10,000 in there plus any tax savings really means that you can invest almost $15,000 in this account, right? So we're going to put our $10,000, we're going to put some tax savings in there, right? And so this is really like after tax putting $10,000 in, which is what we were doing before, right? So that's what we did before. Those were after tax dollars. So I'm using this crazy number. It's called a gross up calculation. I'm using the bigger number because I want it to be the same before tax dollars that we were talking about when we put $10,000 in before, right? So we're going to put our $10,000 in, right? We're going to be hands off here in the 401k. We're not going to be a super smart investor, right? So maybe we're actually only going to get a 10% return here, right? So before we were looking at, 12%, we were actively managing this, right? We were being super smart investor. Here we're going to go with tax efficiency. We're going to do a passive investment strategy, right? We're going to put this thing in the 401k and let it rock. So it's going to be a 10% return, but we also get to put tax savings in there, right? So a couple of things. One, we get to put that big amount in there, right? Because we are also putting the tax savings in there. And then the earnings are not getting taxed until all the way at the end, right? So option one, $10,000. Those are after tax, getting invested in our return in our account, earning 12%. It gets taxed each year at 35%, right? So it's really just 7.8% that compounds annually. Option two is that contribution to a 401k plan, right? Again, it's tax deductible, right? It's really salary diverted. So in order to contribute the same amount, so we're like apples to apples, 15,385. So way more that we get to put in there. The funds in the 401k also accrue tax deferred earnings, right? So we don't have to pay the tax until all the way at the end. So we're going to earn 10%, but guess what? We get to keep all 10% in the account until we get all the way to the end, right? So we get to put in more money. We get to avoid paying tax till the end. So more is compounding, right? But we have a lower interest rate, all right? So just in your own head, like think about what that looks like at 30, 40, or even 50 years, right? And again, at some point we have to pay tax, right? And that's on that back end when we take it out. So the figures I'm about to show you are after you've paid that tax at withdrawal, right? So if we take the whole thing out at 30%, or at 30 years, we're gonna assume we pay all of the tax at year 30. If we wait until year 40, we'll pay all of the tax, take the whole distribution at year 40, right? So the tax is included just all the way at the end, right? So the $10,000, we grossed it up 10%, right? So active management, right? We've seen this guy before at year 50, right? We were right under 450,000 and we were right at, 425, whatever. At year 30, right? That was the $100,000, right? So this was a thing we'd seen before. So we should be used to this one. What happens then when we go to tax efficiency, right? Tax efficiency was where we put it in the 401k. We earned a slightly lower return, but we aren't going to pay the tax until the end on that one, right? So what happens there? So at 50 years, we were at 425. What happens when we say, instead of just putting that in a savings account, let's put that thing in a 401k. What does that look like? And now we're at just under $1.2 million at 50 years, right? So using that tax efficient vehicle, right, that 401k, we have what, 175,000-ish here, right, at year 30. At year 40, we're at like 400 and something thousand. And here we're at $1.17 million at 50 years, right? Again, that's from a single deposit into that account. I'm not even on consistency at this point, right? I am on one time put that money in, right? Do this math one single time. So, some questions. Can we make this better? Well, you can still actively manage your funds in a 401k. So if you're going to be a smart investor over here in your savings account, you can still be a smart investor in your 401k. So we had a 12% return earlier when we were being super smart active investor. Guess what? You can get a 12% return then inside your 401k. So like, what does that do to the number to go from that 10% return to the 12% return, right? So actively managing that investment in the 401k results in what? It's hard to see here, right? Because we're kind of squished down, but at 30 years, we're at about 300,000. At 40 years, right, we're at just under $1 million. And at 50 years, we're at almost $3 million from a single investment. Now, what else can we talk about here? I mentioned an employer match. So what happens if our employer matches our contribution? That means I'm going to put in 15,385. and I saved a lot of dollars on my taxes. And my employer is going to put in 15,385. So now the government is helping us by putting off collecting tax until the end. And our employer is helping us by matching, right? Giving us that free money. And we've already learned that we can actively manage, right? And so we're going to be amazing and actively manage the funds here. And what happens? You should expect that it's going to about double, right? So where are we at 50 years? Boom, almost $60 million. So again, with that match, we've gone from like here we were at, about 300,000 to just under 600, right? A doubling. Give it another 10, right? Again, we've sort of doubled. And at 50, this is actually $5.78 million, right? So again, we were talking about that employer match. So we've got the employer matching, we've got the government helping us out, right? We're actively investing things. So we started early. We asked the government for help. We took our employer up on free money. What was the other tool we learned about that we haven't even thrown in the mix yet? That thing was consistency, right? What happens if we do all of these things? All of them, right? So we're going to start early. We're going to ask the government to help, and that means use a proper, qualified retirement plan. We're going to ask our employer to help with that match. We're going to actively manage our money, and we're going to do this every year. And that means we're putting that $15,000 in the 401k each year. Our employer is going to match that thing. We're going to be a smart investor. We're going to get a 12% return. And we asked the government to help, right? This was a qualified retirement plan. So we're not paying taxes till the end. So what crazy number do we think we end up with at the end of that 50 years? Again, I know it's a lot of money. It's waiting till we're 75, but the numbers just get so big. I just love to see them, right? So we're putting $15,000 in every single year. Our employer is matching that every year. And we're going to be able to do this until we are 75. And again, you can cut this off earlier. It's still a massive number, right? If you did that for 50 years from 25 to 75, you would be at $53 million. Now, obviously, there's inflation, cost of living adjustments, right? It's going to be more expensive when you're 75, but probably when you're 75, you've maybe made a dent in, paying off your mortgage and you have a house. So you're not making mortgage payments, right? You maybe aren't trying to save for your kids to go to college. You aren't trying to save for you to retire, right? So some of your expenses are going to go down. And you're like, I probably don't need $53.7 million. That would be freaking amazing, but I probably don't need that much to retire, right? So now you're in a position where you could be like, oh, maybe I could retire then at 65. You would have $17.2 million there. And that should be enough, right, to be able to retire, right? So this is my friend, again, the Everything Bagel, which is I'm putting in $15,000 every single year, which again is a lot, right? And so you're over there like, that looks amazing. But Dr. Burke, there is absolutely no way I can do $15,000 every year. I would like to have a roof over my head. I would like to eat dinner, and I have to repay student loans, right? So what I'm going to tell you is the Everything Bagel maxed out, like our total contributions and employers matching at huge percentages, not a thing that's necessarily going to happen, right? The Everything Bagel is kind of hard to come by. But what I want you to walk away with this is that doing something and doing something early is so much better than doing nothing, right? And so again, I'm fully admitting $15,000 a year is really hard to pass up, right? To defer on that. And you're probably not getting a $15,000 match from your employer, right? So like, let's talk about a number that's more manageable, right? What if we do $1,000? There are 52 weeks in the year, right? So that's like $20 a week, right? So something much more manageable, right? What does that look like if we start small with $1,000, right? And that's for the year, $1,000 for the year. So we do $1,000 and we do everything else in the Everything Bagel treatment, right? At the end of 30 years here, right? It doesn't look like a lot because it's just so big out here. But at the end of 30 years, you're going to have $540,000 at age 55. right? If you hang out then until you're 40, right? And we're talking about being able to qualify for Medicare and stuff. At 40, you're going to have 1.7 million. And if you could wait just a little bit longer, right, at 75, at 50 years in, you're looking at 5.4 million, right? And that's paying that tax on withdrawal. So this, the account is actually much higher than that before, you pay that tax. So here at 50, if you just left it in there, that would actually be about 8.2 million before you paid the tax, right? So again, you do have to pay the tax. And so it's about 5.4 million after you've paid the tax. And again, that was doing something much smaller and way more manageable, right? We were talking about $1,000 for the year, right? So $1,000 for the year. And you've made a huge improvement in your retirement lifestyle, right? And most of that was by doing what? Starting early, being consistent, right? And getting that help from the government in the form of deferring the taxes, right? So what else? We started out, with that $10,000 graduation gift, right? You could have spent it, right? Or you could save it and sort of start a lifetime habit. And again, I was looking at $1,000 here, right? So it is possible to do this with much smaller amounts if you start early. Notice if we wait until we're like in our 40s to start saving, right? We don't have a long runway. That money doesn't accumulate very quickly, right? You need that time to really start working your way up this crazy curve, right? So start early and start often, right? So part of this, right, we're talking about these crazy numbers and like how much you're going to have, right? So part of the question also is like, how much do you really need in retirement? Right. So it's not just about saving, right? So we sort of talked about that, right? Save money, do it wisely. It's about estimating your future needs and figuring out how to meet them, right? So, right, let's estimate how much we need. We're going to save and invest wisely. And then we need to like figure out how to maintain our lifestyle afterwards, right? So, what are we talking about in retirement? Some of our expenses aren't going to go away, right? I talked about some that might, right? Like you might have fully paid off your house, but maybe you haven't, right? But some of our expenses are actually going to increase, right? Like healthcare might go up. And so it's really important when you talk about this to think about what kind of lifestyle you want and how much that really costs, right? And maybe you're like, you know what? I'm going to want to like travel all the time. Well, you might need more money than somebody who's like, I would have been working all the time, surrounded by noise, and I just want to sit in my living room and knit quietly in peace, right? And maybe you need less money than the person who's decided they're taking cruises around the world all the time, right? So you really have to think about your own lifestyle goals and not somebody else's. You also need to consider that people are living longer, right? Retirement might last more than 30 years. And that means we need to consider inflation, right? And that's going to erode our purchasing power, right? So make sure that you have enough money set aside here as well. So we have some retirement like rules of thumb, right? And this is what you need to use to sort of help you figure out how much you need in retirement, right? So some people like the 80% rule. And if you're like, you know what, I'm the travel the world person, I think I actually need 100% of my pre-retirement income. That's fine. Ramp it up. Know that that's what you're looking at, right? But again, the general rule is like 80%. So if you're making $60,000 a year, 70 to 80% of that would then be $42,000 to $48,000 per year, right? And again, adjust those estimates based on your sort of lifestyle goals. What do you want to do in retirement, right? The next part of this is a 4% rule. And again, there's some debate over what the right number is. This is the withdrawal rate. So, sort of a conservative rule is that we don't want to draw down our savings too quickly. And so if we take no more than 4% of our account balance, we should not sort of outlive this, right? So we came up with like $48,000 on the high end, right? $60,000 right now, 80% of that is 48,000. So What does that look like? Well, to have $48,000 each year, we need to have 1.2 million. So we just kind of work backwards, right? X amount in savings times 0.04 equals $48,000, right? And so we solve for X, right? And we come up with about 1.2 million. So if you're looking to have $48,000 in retirement each year, you need to have about $1.2 million, right? Sitting there in assets that you can draw down. So we talked about, investments, smart investing. You do need to know that all investments come with some risk, right? But there are ways to sort of manage that. A mix of stocks and bonds will help you balance your portfolio. And that mix should change as you age. So if you're looking at like your 401k and they have, target funds with dates in them, that's what's happening, right? They're saying your target date for retirement is like 2060, 2070. And inside those funds, they're actually adjusting that mix of stocks and bonds as you approach retirement, right? So if you're in your 20s, you can afford to invest more aggressively because you have time to recover from market dips, right? If you're in your 60s, you want to preserve your savings just a little bit more carefully, right? You aren't as well equipped to handle sort of those bumps, right? So stocks have that higher return, but they're riskier. Bonds generally have a lower return, but that comes with, a lower risk, but that comes with a lower return. So again, that ratio of stocks to bonds in your account should change as you approach retirement. And again, if you don't want to try and figure out the math on that, we have most 401k plans have investments with funds, mutual funds in there that are target dates. And again, that's targeting your retirement date so that it's automatically doing all of those adjustments for you. So, how much should I save? Well, a lot of people say start with 15% of your income. And again, totally get it. It's hard, right? And some is better than nothing. If you're really on top of it, right? Some people say they love a 50-30-20 rule, right? I'm going to tell you right now, this is not about perfection. It needs to be about progress, right? So start early, even with small amounts, and that's going to give you that huge heads up, right? But ideally, or sort of, aggressive savings goals here, people talk about that 50-30-20 rule, and that's to help you try and balance needs, wants, and savings. So 50% of your take-home pay being spent on needs, and I know you're already laughing. You're like, have you seen the cost of housing these days? Like, totally get it, right? This is all in an ideal world. This is like our goal. It's good to sometimes have a stretch goal, right? So 50% of our take home income on needs, 30% of that on wants, and 20% on savings. And in the short term, maybe that wants category needs to shrink down from the 30%, right? But that you're really trying to increase the savings and you're trying to do that sooner rather than later, right? Again, we saw time was really the most important piece. And even if you're just like in here, right? $20 a week is all that's happening. That is way better than nothing, right? So don't beat yourself up about it. That is progress, right? That is progress. So how can we sort of help ourselves out here? Well, automation is our friend. If I never see the money in my checking account, I can't spend it. We're going to like Papille some sort of rotisserie, right? We want to set it and forget it and just watch it grow, right? So we want to do this as a payroll deduction so we never see it, right? We call this things paying ourselves first, or we work that into our budget, right? To make sure that it's happening. And we do some budgeting, right? To really free up some savings there. So track where your money goes, right? Just use an app, use a whatever works for you, an Excel spreadsheet, doesn't matter. But for a while, track where all of your money is going, every cent of it, right? So that you can really see the whole picture. And then you can cut out unnecessary expenses, right? Like maybe this is where you see like, oh, I'm paying for like a Netflix and an Amazon Prime and whatever other streaming services are out there right now. Like, oh, maybe I'm paying for two streaming services. maybe it's possible to only pay for one streaming service and, alternate them during the year, like binge my show on this service and then swap it out and binge on another, or cut them all out to, all together and, watch free stuff, get stuff from the library. I don't know, right? But like, you don't know any of that until you really track every single expense so that you can figure out like, where is it possible to make some cuts here? And then we want to reallocate from that short term, right, spending now on things like wants to really focusing on that long term goal. Now, budgeting does not mean depriving yourself, right? I'm not over here telling you that you can never have Starbucks and that you can never have avocado toast or whatever the cool meme is right now, right? It's not telling you that you have to take all of that out. It is not completely depriving yourself, right? But it's really being intentional about what that looks like. Right. So finding that extra $20 a week, right, which is really that $1,000 per year example, could mean thousands more at retirement, right? Especially if you do that early, right? We love to do it early so we can take advantage of that, right? So again, I'm not saying completely deprive yourself, but do make sure you're tracking all of that so that you can find the extra $20 a week, right? We want to make sure we're starting early. We want to try to be consistent. We want to try to use some sort of qualified plan if we can. And if we can take advantage of the employer match and that free money, like so much better for ourselves, right? So let's do all of those things. So we're going to avoid some pitfalls, right? We're going to make mistakes. It's common, right? Everybody makes some mistakes in retirement, but knowing what to watch out for is going to give you some power to be able to avoid that, right? So let's not wait too long to start saving. Let's make sure we're saving enough. And then make sure we're actually evaluating like our risk threshold and what that looks like, right? And making sure that, we're pretty well balanced for whatever our age and our circumstances are. And, these days there are plenty of resources out there to help you figure out what that looks like, right? But just make sure you have an appropriate risk appetite, right? Because that has a huge difference as well, right? Going from that 10% to that 12% return, right? And to get to that 12% return, you're going to have to take on a little bit more risk, right? And you'll see that there are even some models out there or modeling software, modeling apps, where you can have some of those stock bumps happening along the way and like, seeing how often they happen, having it model that and have your portfolio take a bit of a hit and see how it recovers. Those are out there, right? So that you can look at that as well. So what's next? So I think we should take some action today, right? So after today, you've already sat here, you've learned a lot of stuff. Don't just move on and forget about this, right? There's only so much we can do in an hour, right? But you can do some things after this, right? And so my goal for you, my hope for you is that afterwards you do one thing, right? So you could open a Roth IRA, right? So go to your bank, open a Roth IRA, talk to your parents or your family members, right? Use a calculator. Just do something to start building that momentum, right? And maybe that's thinking about your goals and sort of mapping out what you think that looks like in retirement and giving yourself that target at the end and working backwards and saying, like, what the heck do I need to do to make that happen? Start small would be like we're opening the Roth IRA and we're putting $100 in because that's what I can find right now, right? And then using some tools like retirement calculators, right? And that's the part where we can maybe say, like, what do I think I actually need? How much, could I spend each year? What am I looking to spend each year? Gross that back up and say, how much would I need to have in retirement? Work backwards from there. Like if I started as soon as I graduate putting money aside, how much would I actually need to put aside? Right. And you might find out that because you have time on your side, that number is just much more approachable and it causes you to be more willing, to defer that spending money right now. And you say, like, yep, I can do without some of these things I was hoping to do. I'll, meal prep instead of going out at lunch to just save those extra dollars, right? And It helps to be able to visualize that. It helps to see that with all of that time, it's not that hard to do, right? The money that you need to put aside is much smaller than you thought. And it helps you sort of prioritize that paying yourself first. And it's going to develop good habits, right? It builds good habits. It helps you build momentum. It helps you maybe say in the future, let's say I get a 3% like cost of living nonsense raise, whatever, but like I can maybe use part of that raise to increase my overall lifestyle, but maybe I want to use part of that to go towards, increasing my retirement savings. Right. And again, it makes those trade-offs a little bit, more palatable and easier to digest and say, yes, I can increase the 401k contribution this year for part of the raise, right? It doesn't mean all of it needs to go there or all of it needs to do that every year, but that I'm going to do my best to at least intentionally think about what that looks like, right? So that's what I have, right? So thanks for being here tonight. It's really sort of an adulting topic, right? But you're really already adults, and your future self is going to thank you for those steps that you take today, right? So, what do I want you to do? Start early and stay consistent, right? Those are really the two big takeaways I hope you get from tonight. And again, future you is going to thank present you for making this happen. So, what type of product? Are we talking a financial product when we're talking about putting $10,000 in or 1,000? When I started out, I was talking about $10,000 in literally just a savings account, right? Like at your bank, no frills savings account. You're just like, or an investment account, right? That's probably more like a stock account because I was saying we were being a smart investor, but that you just open up an account and you start putting, buying stocks to generate that 12% return or ETFs or mutual funds or whatever you happen to be in, right? Um, and then when I said like, oh, we could, improve this and ask the government for help, then we were switching over to something like a 401k where we had the employer match. So those funds would be in your 401k. That's going to happen through your employer, right? And within that 401k, you're going to have investment options. So you don't just have to go with the standard options there from, it's not like you put the money in the 401k and you don't have any choice. You still have a lot of choices there. If you don't have a 401k, you can do an IRA. Go to your bank, open the IRA. Again, within the IRA, you can also invest in stocks. So can I clarify in that 50, 30, 20, if we're including contributions to a 401k, yeah, any sort of savings to your retirement would go towards that goal. Any retirement account balance calculators that you recommend? Oh, I should have had some links up there. Can I send some links to you, Cameron or Shalise, and get those like added somehow? Are we getting a yes and no?
We could do that. We could put them in the video description. And if anyone that's attending today fills out the survey at the end and wants that information, we can share it with them.
Perfect. But there are a million out there, smart assets, the wallet people, Wallet Hub. Like there are a ton of people out there who have some really good calculators, retirement calculators. And so you can just a little Google search. These days, ChatGPT, your AIs are actually, this is a thing they can do, right? Like this is a thing they can do well, if you prompt it well, right? That you're 25 now, you're looking to retire at 65. Here's what you think you're going to make now, project that out, and just you can prompt it and it can actually do most of that. It's going out and finding those calculators and spitting it back to you, but it's going to do a lot of that work for you. Do I recommend having both a 401k and an IRA? So, matching out your employer match and then putting more into an IRA to save. Yeah, so if your 401k comes with a match from your employer, it's going to be better than the IRA that doesn't have the match with it. So, up until you max out that employer match, you need to leave it in the 401k, right? Because you want to max out that match. If you manage to get there very quickly, if it's easier for you, because then it can be, the payroll deduction and you don't have to worry about waiting until you file your tax return to take the deduction for the IRA contribution. Staying in the 401k until you max that out is fine. The sort of trade-off there is if the 401k your employer is in only has options that come with pretty high fees, and so you're losing some return to high fees in mutual funds or ETF options that you have, then switching over to an IRA where you can maybe find some lower fees is a good option. Again, the 401k is great just because the employer match, and then after that, it's good that it can come out of your paycheck pre-tax, so lowering that withholding every pay period. And with the IRA, you have to wait until you file the tax return to put it in there and get the deduction and reduce it. That being said, you can sort of tweak your withholding at work to try to offset that when you're doing the IRA, right? That's a little bit more work. It's a little bit more sophisticated, trying to map out what that looks like. So it can be a little bit more challenging. If you have maxed out your 401k though, and you're like, I still want to save more dollars, an IRA is an amazing place to do that. Certainly, before you start talking about like just a regular like savings account. So here we're hearing one piece of advice from Shalise was to take any bonus or one-time merit raises and see if you can move that new increase into savings and still live on your old salary. Absolutely. And plenty of people talk about that. Yes. Take those bonuses or take a tax refund, right? When you have those little extra pockets of money, putting it into a retirement account, putting the raise in the retirement account. Again, with the raise, it's really hard to say, like, I want to deprive myself completely and I don't want to have any lifestyle creep or cover any of that cost of living. I want to put the whole raise into retirement. That's really hard to do, right? But again, starting small seemed to help, right? So even if you could just take a portion of that raise and put it into retirement savings, you're going to be in good shape. But yeah, taking bonuses and unexpected bumps in pay and putting those into some sort of retirement savings is an amazing option. And we saw single payments of $10,000 can matter a lot, right? So like being able to put that in, even though it's just one time, is still going to help you, especially if you have that long runway, right? And so time is your friend there. That's what I have. What else we got?
Anybody else have any other questions? Any students, if you want to unmute and ask your question, you're more than welcome to, or you can put something in the chat. There has been so much great information. I always learn something. I mean, and I'm looking at my retirement closer than all the rest of y'all. And I always learn something. So thank you so much. But we want to make sure we cover any other questions.
Something that I don't think we touched on, Dr. Burke, and it might not be, so hopefully it's not something that students are looking at, is what happens if someone's in a situation where they are faced with a decision to withdraw from their 401k or an IRA because of an emergency?
Yeah.
What recommendations do you have then?
Yeah. So if you have an emergency, right, it's kind of hard because some of that money is locked up. If you have money in a Roth account, that's a lot easier to get out, right? Because it doesn't necessarily, so you can take that out earlier than you can from a 401k because they're not collecting taxes on it. Like there are a lot fewer rules on the distributions there. 401ks, we can actually take a loan against our 401k balance and repay that, right? So as a 401k, we have the option to do that. There is an early withdrawal penalty though. If you're like, I just need the cash, I'm not going to be able to repay it, so I can't do a loan. You can take it out and there is a 10% penalty. There are obviously some exceptions to that, buying a house, some medical expenses will be considered exceptions there. But loans also an option out of the 401k.
Well, I think we're right at the time. Again, another fabulous Meet with an Expert session with Dr. Burke. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your just all this knowledge. We really appreciate it. I do want to tell you guys, as you exit our Zoom, you're going to have that little quick 6-question survey. We're so glad that you guys joined us tonight. I do have I just want to let you guys know we have a lot more with Maroon Money Month. Okay, so check out our Instagram, see what other sessions we have. Come and play games if you're on the Denton campus. And other than that, stay strong. Have a great rest of your evening. And thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks.
And we can stop the recording.